Hello and welcome to the aquarium home. My name is Dom. I love disc golfing, fishing, and most importantly, aquariums. Today's video is going to be a little bit all over the place. This is my first time recording myself, but I'm excited to teach you guys a little bit about my tanks. So here on the aquarium home channel, I'll show you a simple approach to freshwater aquariums so that you can set up a beautiful aquarium that you love and you can maintain it for years and years and show off to everybody. So there are great channels out there to learn from: Boost Plant, MJ Aquascaping, Aquarium Co-op, even Green Aqua from Hungary. When I was starting out as a kid, I watched all these videos and I thought they were great, but they were a bit out of reach for me as an 11-year-old boy. And all the Chihiro's lights, the $200 filters. Every time I looked at my tank with rocks and plastic plants and compared it to theirs, I always felt short and I was discouraged. And anytime I had an algae issue, I was like, why are my plants, why are my rocks, my glass, why are those green when all your YouTube videos have crystal clear water and amazing everything. It wasn't until that I got older that I realized that it wasn't the lack of equipment that was in my way from having those tanks. It was actually not focusing on activities like the behind the scenes activities like water changes. Once I started practicing those, I was able to start maintaining and setting up beautiful tanks like this or this. So that's my main goal here. My main goal is to help you create an ecosystem that you love looking at and honestly enjoy maintaining. So in today's video, I want to tell you a little bit about myself, but also walk you through one of the most important aspects of fish keeping in aquariums: water changes and tank maintenance. So this is my very first aquarium. You can see here, the first book I read about fish keeping was Tropical Fish by Douglas Goem, which was published in 1970. So it was an old book. It had fish profiles in it, the basics of aquascaping, which is like water gardening, setting up beautiful underwater landscapes, and preventative issues for fish diseases and pests. It was a cool book, but it was really old, and I just wanted to tell you my first step into the aquarium world. But my very first tank was a 15-gallon bow front tank my grandpa gave me, so it was almost as old as the book. It came with plastic plants, rocks, fake wood, and other decorations and equipment like air pumps. After reading some things online in that book that I just told you, I learned that you should let your tank cycle for a few weeks. This is called the nitrogen cycle. A little bit more on that in a different video. I don't have time for that today. But after setting up my tank and letting the whole thing run for about 3 weeks without fish in it, I finally got to go to the pet store and pick out fish. And I mean, who doesn't love that, right? I got cherry barbs, Mickey Mouse platies. I even got a couple guppies, and at one point I had a pleco. But yeah, for a few weeks it was going great. My fish were loving it. I was feeding them. It was in my room, so every night before I went to bed I was looking at it. Until one day I realized that there was algae on the rocks. And it was starting to grow on my decorations, my fake plants. And there was fish poop all up in the crevices of the rocks and on the bottom of the tank. Unacceptable. I had to do a water change. I had to clean everything. So that's exactly what I did. I took out all my fish and put them in a little plastic bowl for the afternoon. I drained the entire tank of its water. I scrubbed it down with an old sponge and the hose outside. I took all the filter media out and I rinsed that off with the hose. After that, I put everything back in the fish tank, all my fish, the rocks, the plants, the filter, set everything back up, filled it back up with water. And that night, all my fish except for 2 died. It was that fast. I was like, as an 11-year-old kid, I was depressed. I was crying. I remember writing in my journal at the time, and I was like, my fish died. What am I going to do now? So there were 3 huge mistakes that I made that night, or that day, looking back at it now. And the 3 were: 1, completely emptying the tank. That was a huge mistake. The second one was cleaning off every single item in there, all the plants and rocks, everything, just, spotless. I cleaned all of that. And the third is refilling the tank with tap water that I did not condition. Any one of those on their own would have contributed to the massive fish death in my aquarium. You're probably not making all of those mistakes. I still hope you're not. But you might either not be doing proper tank maintenance, or you might be neglecting it completely. There are some instances where water changes aren't necessary. And some hobbyists don't do water changes at all. There's different methods and different situations for that. But for the sake of today's video, I'm going to walk you through why, in general, and especially as beginning out, why you should be doing water changes each and every week, at least once a week. And then so that's what I'm going to show you today. And as I walk through that, I'm going to tell you how I do my maintenance on this shrimp tank next to me, step by step. Your fish tank is an ecosystem. As with every other ecosystem in the world, there's a cycle of nutrients that goes on unseen. The fish create waste from the food they eat. The waste is converted into ammonia, the ammonia into nitrite, the nitrite into nitrate, and then the plants uptake the nitrate. So that's a simple view of the nitrogen cycle. That's what's going on in your tank right now, if you have one. That's what's going on in the tank behind me, the tank next to me, and the tank in a different room. That's what's going on. In the wild, those decaying organics, like plants, fish poop, that kind of thing, those organics are either carried away by the current, or the huge, infinite amounts of beneficial bacteria are breaking those things down and recycling it so it's not harmful to the fish or the animals in that ecosystem. But since your tank is a closed ecosystem, meaning there are no outside currents to carry things away, since it's a closed ecosystem, everything remains within it until you remove it manually as the fish keeper. So that means all the waste, the toxic ammonia, things that could kill your fish, they're all living inside of that tank. That's why water changes are so important. That's why I'm walking you through the steps for this video. It's to change the water weekly and dilute those substances so that they're not in harmful levels to your fish. The time it takes to carry out your weekly maintenance depends on a couple factors. The biggest one is obviously the size of the tank. This is a 6-gallon UNS 60L. That's the kind of the tank it is. It takes me maybe 30 minutes to do, probably even less, but today's gonna be a little bit different. It depends on the size of the tank. Yeah, so as a general rule, you should be doing your water changes at least once a week. The greatest factor to determine how often you should be doing it, or any changes to the frequency or the amount of water you're removing, is the number or the amount of waste production in your aquarium. So tanks with lots of fish produce lots of waste. Tanks with fewer fish produce less waste. But when you start throwing in factors like bioload, like plants, the size of the filter, it kind of gets jumbled. That's why the once a week rule is the best one to follow. So this is my UNS 60L. It's a 6-gallon long aquarium. In it are my snowball shrimp colony. Anyways, so this is my UNS 60L. It's 6 gallons, and it's home to my colony of snowball shrimp. Since I have lots of plants in here, you can see I have Storagine repens, I have some Vallisneria nana, just a bunch of plants, a pretty good density of plants. And shrimp don't produce much waste at all. They're actually very low on their waste output. So I only do changes once every 2 weeks. I had COVID 3 weeks ago, or a couple weeks ago. I was in quarantine for a week. I didn't have the energy to do any of my tank maintenances. And then I recovered. But then I was in Colorado for another week. And when I got back, I had a throat infection. So, long story short, I haven't done anything on this tank, my shrimp tank, in the past month. So, as you can see, obviously I've done some plant trimming and I brushed off some of the filter outputs, but besides that, I've done nothing major to that tank. Also, you notice that in the middle of this tank, there has, underneath in the middle, there's a layer of brown aqua soil and then sand. So originally the tank looked like this. The logical explanation is that the water flow moved the aqua soil around to cover the sand. But I sincerely believe those shrimp work day and night to pick up blocks of aqua soil and cover up the sand because it's just so even. But anyway, so I'm going to show you how I do water changes on this tank, and with this process is the same on all of my tanks. So the same as the black water on the tank behind me, it's the same as the tank in my living space. So you can copy this process if you want. I think it's very simple, it's very easy. Step 1 to my water change process is I always ask myself, what needs to be done today? So I take a second, I look at my tank, and by looking at it, just by looking at this tank, I see that I want to trim the Alternanthera, which are these red plants, because they've gotten big and they're blocking out the light to some of my smaller plants. I also want to remove them from the foreground on the left side because of that same reason. And I think plants with bigger leaves are better suited for a place further back in the tank to provide perspective. I'm going to trim my Storagine repens and replant it to get the carpet growing out. Some of them melted I re-escaped this a while ago, but some of them melted are just now coming back. And I'm also going to trim the Vallisneria in the back just to promote more growth, more length, so I can get a good umbrella appearance to this tank. I'll also clean the glass, the filter outlets, and scrape off the residue from where the water evaporates towards the top of the tank. It sounds like a lot, but it only is because I haven't done anything on this tank for a long time. It typically only takes 30 to 45 minutes, and it's just a minor water change. So that was step number 1. Take a look at it. Ask yourself what needs to be done today. Step number 2 in my water change process is before doing anything, before putting your hands in the tank, turn off all of the electronics on your fish tank. So that means the heater, the filter, a water skimmer if you're using one. You don't need to turn off the light if you have a darker room so you can see what you're doing. But biggest thing is the heater and the filter. I've broken at least one of each by forgetting to do that. The heater cracked and broke, and I broke the pump on the filter because it was running dry. That's number 2. Turn off all electronics before putting your hands in the tank. Step number 3 to my process is if your tank is full, take out a little bit of water from the top. That way you have some space to move around in your tank without splashing any over the sides. But don't beat yourself up if you make a mess, if you spill some water on your carpet, on your floor, on your table. It's just water. I always say that it's not a water change unless there's a water mess, and I stand by that. Almost every single time I make some sort of mess, either by spilling water. Sometimes my tubes fall out and just pump water over the floor. It's not a big deal. That was step number 3. Empty out some water from the top of the tank. Give yourself some room. Step number 4 in this process is to clean the aquarium glass using a sponge or a glass scraper. A glass scraper is essentially an X-Acto blade, a razor blade on a stick. I like this better than a sponge because it's more sleek and you can move around more without disturbing or making the water move a lot. Yeah, I mean, I used to use a sponge, but I found that it created lots of water movement and things would either move or fall or some debris would float up. So that's why I switched over to a glass scraper. Step number 5 is trim my plants. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to trim my plants right now. And this is one of my favorite parts because it's like I'm actually molding my tank. It is something that I want it to look like. If you're dosing fertilizers and you're trimming your plants, cut back on the amount that you're dosing for the next 7 or 10 days, because if you're dosing the same amount of fertilizer for a fewer number of plants, there will be excess nutrients and you risk an algae spike. Step number 6 is to drain 20 to 50% of your tank water into a bucket or into the outdoors, outside. For my shrimp tank, I'm only doing 20% because there isn't much waste buildup. As I said before, shrimp don't produce much waste, and I have lots of plants in there taking care of any excess nutrients. But for some of my tanks in the past, like my old 50-gallon long right here, I do up to 50%. But I think it's a good general amount is about 35%, so you're not messing with water parameters too much, but you're still removing a good amount of excess nutrients and wastes. It really just depends. If you have any questions about your tank or about anything specifically water change, put them in the comments and I'll answer them right away. I love answering any questions about aquariums, about aquascapes, about fish keeping, so just put them in the comments. I'll answer them as fast as I can. Also, I think this is a good time to say that if you're liking this content and you want to see more like it, hit the like button and subscribe, and that way I know that you guys are enjoying this and I can keep producing content for you guys. Okay, so now back to the tank. Step number 7, we just said step number 6. Number 7 is to fill up your tank using dechlorinated water. API has some great tap water conditioners. There's also Chem Prime, which is the same thing. They're all tap water conditioners, and they remove chloramines. They remove chlorine from the water. And as I told you in my first story, my first tank, you don't want chlorine in your tank. Fish will die. Beneficial bacteria will die, and you'll be sad. I was crushed. So if you're on city water, you need a tap water conditioner every time you do a water change, or anytime you add new water to your fish tank. You could be topping it off from evaporation, but you need a tap water conditioner. I'm lucky enough to live on groundwater, so there's no chlorine in my tank, but I have API water conditioner and I have Chem Prime in my equipment, just in case there's, for some reason, chlorine finds its way to my setup. But I always keep those on hand. That's step number 7, fill your tank back up with dechlorinated water. Here's a pro tip. When you're filling your tank back up with water, use a bowl or a plastic bag. I even saw this one guy, he used a paper towel and put it down in his tank. But that will, when you pour your water onto that, it'll catch the water, it'll distribute it, so you're not disturbing your substrate, your plants, or your fish. Step number 8 in my water change process is to net out any plant trimmings on the water surface. So the reason this comes after filling your tank up is because once the water level comes back up, it'll take the plant trimmings with it, because those plant trimmings will float, and you can just net those off from the top of the water instead of having to dig into other plants to get it. It'll be at the top for you. Step number 9, this is the last and final step in this process, is to plug all your electronics back in. You plug your filter back in, plug in your heater, your water skimmer if you're using one, your light if you unplugged it or turned it off. Turn those all back on. There's one time in the fall I forgot to plug my heater back in. And I was looking at my fish. My fish were losing their color. They're becoming more sluggish. The plants were kind of, nothing looked very happy in that tank. And I was like, what is going on? I tested the water. Everything was fine. I looked under my cabinet, found that my heater wasn't plugged in and they were freezing. Just plug everything back in when you're done. That's all there is to it. Water changes are not that difficult. They're not that complicated. It's just follow a step-by-step system and map everything out, and it'll be good for you. You can put on TV while you do it. One of my tanks is in a room with the TV, so I watch my favorite TV shows. I like putting on Spotify's Daily Drive, so I get a good mix of music and current news. I think that's a good way to do it. Or you can put on a podcast. Whatever you want playing in your ear, you can have that on while you're doing your tank. If you're not looking at this process as a chore, but instead as a way through which to create something, to design something, to mold something, it can become a great outlet for you to depress, to escape from work, from school, from even people. It's one of my favorite things to do after the work day, is just to get in elbows deep into my aquarium and work on it. Thanks for watching this. If you want to see more content like this, please subscribe and like, and even tell me what you want to learn more about. If you want to learn more about specific steps in the aquarium maintenance, more about the nitrogen cycle, lighting, all those kind of things. I have a newsletter that I send out weekly, 1 to 2 emails weekly, that are like these videos, but more easy to digest. You can read them in passing. It'll take like 30 seconds. But if you want to subscribe to that newsletter, click the link below. It's in the description. Also, in the description, I put a list of the equipment I use for my water changes, the tube, the bucket, the scissors, all that is in a link below if you want to get some of that for yourself. And that's it. That's the video. Thank you guys so much for being here on my first video. Happy scaping.